everyone. I won't give you COVID, but I do have COVID. So if my voice gives out and I have a coughing fit, please bear with me. Let me pull up my slides here. All right, everybody should see that. Give me a thumbs up if you can. Awesome. All right, well, believe it or not, it's 81 degrees outside today, but we're prepping for winter. And so just a quick note on prepping for winter. Those of you who live in bear country, the bears love, love, love honey. And late September and October is when most colonies get raided by bears. So if you, even if you live out in places like Woodinville that you think maybe aren't bear country, you probably do live in bear country and may want to consider doing something about putting an electric fence around your bees, because a wooden fence won't do it. The bears will climb over and they make your yard look like a garbage dump after they go through your colonies. Ask me how I know. So this is a picture of my bees over at my cabin on Hood Canal. And the only thing that I've found so far that has kept the bear out is this dog kennel with, you counted them, 6 strands of hot wire, which, by the way, last year the bear must have gotten over there during a power outage and ripped down all of my electric fencing and did his darndest to dig under the corner of the kennel and dug a hole about 1.5 feet deep and somehow ended up giving up. So those 6-foot dog kennels that are available at lots of different supply stores really are worth their money, because so far, knock on wood, my bees, once I put them in this kennel, have escaped the bear. Again, knock on wood. So let's just start talking about winter colony survival tips. If your bees have a lot of varroa right now, they're doomed. And next month is when many of you are going to tell me, my bees absconded. They're all gone and they flew away somewhere. Well, they usually don't abscond in the fall. What happens from now until the end of October is colonies that have mite counts above 2%, they die from the viruses that are vectored by those mites. And they fly away in onesie twosies and they fly away to die in the field. And so the beekeeper will go in and say, this weekend, and check their colony. And then at the end of October, they'll go back and all the bees will be gone, except for maybe 100 of them. And if you look really closely, the queen's always in there, or she's laying there dead on the bottom of the colony because they collapsed from the mite load and the ensuing viruses that are really taking hold now. So this weekend is a great time to check your colonies to make sure that your mite levels are below 2%. And if they're not, to do something about it, to use one of the approved treatments for the weather temperature range that we've got going right now. Pick your favorite and do something. So if you've got a couple of colonies that are smallish, you're really better to take your losses now and combine those colonies by doing a newspaper combine, and then go into the winter with 1 strong colony instead of 2 weak ones. You also want to make sure that they have adequate honey stores. And if you live near Puget Sound, that equates to about 70 pounds of honey. That's 70. And just a quick reminder on that, the weight you kind of guess in your colony, a full deep frame is somewhere between 7 and 10 pounds, of honey, and fully capped medium frame is somewhere between 3 and 4 pounds. A lot of them will have that, that honey arch going on in there. So just kind of guess. One way that I check my colonies is I'll go behind and I'll hook my fingers underneath the back of the colony and I'll pick them up. Just lift them up off the hive stand and guesstimate how heavy they are. You know, ladies, if you can't pick it up, there's plenty of honey in there. Yeah, that's how Kathy does it. She's like, I can't budge this. There's plenty. Many of us have stronger fingers though, and can lift up on there and kind of gauge, is it, you know, heavier than a 6-year-old or not. And then that honey, where it's located is really important too, because you want it located above and around where the brood is. And that picture on the left-hand side there is what a colony should kind of look like in the fall, with the brood and what's left of the eggs and capped brood down there in the bottom in the center, with nectar and pollen, food stores right next to them, honey maybe on the outside. And then as the bees eat their stores in the winter, they'll move up. what they will not do in the winter is move down to get honey if they're already up. So they can starve even if there's honey down in the bottom. Got a tickle in my throat. So then emergency food is dry sugar and fondant. We'll talk about that later. And then you want to have an upper entrance to allow the moisture to escape. Dawn, can you help me out? All right, Kathy, you want to talk about feeding 2-to-1 syrup? Put you on the spot here. Kathy.
Would you like me to talk, Tracy?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Yep.
But I have spotty internet, or I could. But I keep pixelating out.
Sure. I can certainly. I should be able to talk about 2-to-1 syrup. So if you've been around for a while, you know that you've been feeding 1-to-1 sugar syrup from the spring through the summer as the bees have needed it. That's for the bees, to help the bees raise brood. And it's, you know, reasonably close to nectar, so they can just immediately feed it to the larva. What you're feeding right now is actually with the intention of the bees storing it pretty much immediately. So you want it to have essentially as low of a moisture content as you can reasonably get with you know, being able to mix it with sugar and water. So that generally is done as a 2 parts sugar to 1 part water mixture. If you've got a like paint mixer drill, you can do that with like tap hot water. Lots of people do like heating the water hotter than that and then adding the sugar. That will help the sugar absorb into the water and get you a better 2-to-1 ratio of your sugar to water. But if you've got a drill, you can do it with tap hot water. I do that regularly.
You just don't want to boil the sugar and water.
Yeah, don't boil the sugar and water. That'll caramelize the sugar. That'll cause off chemically things that are not great for the bees. As it says on the, and that's 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, as I said, that can be by weight or by volume. It doesn't matter. They're both close enough. As it says in the slide, you can continue feeding until the daytime temperatures are below 55 degrees Fahrenheit with syrup. That is because honeybees are cold-blooded. If they drink syrup that's too cold, they're going to go catatonic. So once temperatures get below 55 degrees or so, the bees are going to stop taking it regardless. However, I do recommend get the bees fed up as quickly as possible, because they still, once you've given them that 2-to-1 syrup, they still need to dehydrate it down and cap it. And that's going to get harder and harder the later in the year, the cooler and the wetter that it gets. Tracy, is there anything major on that slide you want me to hit that I haven't?
You totally did. Thank you very much, Peter.
Perfect. Back to you.
All right, I'll do my best. We might, this might be one of those meetings where we do pinch hitting on slides people haven't seen yet.
Happy to talk as much as is helpful.
All right, thanks. All right, and then so next up, you'll be reading a lot on the forums about beading shims and moisture quilts. So I thought I'd put together a slide to show you guys what the heck are they. And so I started using moisture quilts and feeding shims several years ago. I read about them on Rusty Burlew's Honeybee Suite, SUITE website. She's got instructions on how to make these in there. And so I've had a lot better luck overwintering my bees once I started using these. And like I said, you'll read a lot about this on the thing. So I made some photos for you guys to see. On the bottom left-hand side is my feeding shim. I happen to be inherently lazy, so I don't bother making fondant or sugar boards. I take some newspaper and I pour dry white sugar over the top and I put my feeding shim on first, then the newspaper, and then I pour the sugar over the top. And then over the winter time, the moisture from the bees goes up into the sugar absorbs it, gets hard. The bees eat the sugar. If they don't eat all the sugar, and then I take a bucket out with me in the spring, I dump that extra sugar into the bucket, and then I make syrup out of it for them and just strain the newspaper out that I can't peel off. So I put that down first, just as emergency food for everybody. And one person last year looked at this and said, oh, that much sugar. So I put 7 or 8 or 9 pounds of sugar, as much as I can pour in there, into each full-size colony. And then on top of that goes a moisture quilt. And I just use the cheapest rabbit shavings I can get my hands on that particular year. And I use, when I made mine, I used aluminum window screen. It's really cheap and easily stapled onto the bottom of those. And you see the vent holes. And in there's the aluminum screening too, to keep the bugs out. And then that goes on top of the feeding shim, and then the rabbit shavings go in there. So we'll go ahead and move on next. The other question that you'll see a lot is to insulate or not. I have started insulating my telescoping tops with that 1-inch rigid insulation. Works pretty well to keep some of the heat in. And I have this picture because this is, believe it or not, the same day in 2 consecutive years. Anybody want to guess what day that is? It's a holiday, by the way, and it's not Christmas.
Thanksgiving, I guess.
No, later than that.
President's Day?
Happy Valentine's Day. So the left-hand picture is Valentine's Day 3 years ago. The right-hand picture is Valentine's Day 2 years ago. And I don't have Valentine's Day last year, but guess what it looked like? Yeah, it was all snowy again. So there can be a big difference in what February looks like around here. But so there's really no need in Seattle to do hive wraps. One year I experimented in taping my colony seams. And I haven't done that again, but it's in that picture. It keeps, if you put your stuff together early in November or late in October and leave it, the bees will propolize around the edges. So you don't have to worry about a lot of vents going through, so long as your equipment is pretty well built. Some of you that are handy around the house, but not that handy when you're building your shims, you want to make sure that the bottoms match exactly. So make sure that you don't have big gaps there, or you will have water going through there. And then the thing you can't see in here is then you slide your sticky boards. If you have screen bottom boards, you do want to stick your sticky boards down in there underneath the screen bottom board, so that it helps keep the air from blowing up through there. And then it also is a handy way to be able to see how many bees you have in there over the winter. We'll talk about that in a minute. So after we've talked about all that, what does a winter hive look like? And so I thought it'd be good for you guys to see the configuration of at least how I keep my bees. You got the telescoping top there at the very top with that rigid piece of insulation inside of it, followed by the moisture quilt that catches all the moisture coming up through so that it doesn't rain back down on the bees. You've got next that feeding shim, and notice there's a bunch of bees on the front. That's because there's a 5/8 inch hole there that the bees use as an exit. Then I have 2 deeps on this colony, but if you don't have enough bees in October when you're doing this to fill 2 deeps, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and just reduce down to 1 deep or 2 mediums. And that way you don't have a lot of extra space in there for the winter either. Then down there is my entrance reducer. You can kind of see the dirty outline around. Remember last month I showed you a picture with robbing screens on? That dirty outline is from where I took the robbing screen off. And then most people tilt their colonies about an inch lower in the front than in the back. That way, if they do have any water condensation going up, then it runs forward and goes down the front of the colony instead of going straight up and then raining back down on the bees. But if you've got a good moisture quilt in there and your chips aren't already all wet, then the moisture will stay up there in the top and not rain back down on them anyway. And those sticky boards work great because you don't really want to open your colony up very much in the winter. So if you slide the sticky board out and you see a bunch of debris on the bottom, you can tell where the bees are because that's where they're chewing the wax cappings off. And you'll see lines of wax cappings that are down on the bottom. You'll see where your cluster of bees are because that's where all the garbage is on the bottom below that. And you just scrape that off and then slide it back in. I usually look about once a month in the winter. And I wanted to make sure we left a lot of time for questions. I know we went through a bunch of stuff, so if you want me to go back to any slides, just let me know, and then we'll open it up for questions about how to prep for winter. William looks like he's got his hand up first.
Yes, hi. Question about snow, and it's not a question about snow here, but I own some land above Lake Cleellum in Ronald. This past winter, we had at 1.6 feet of snow. There was a cabin near mine that's been there for 35 years, 2-story cabin that collapsed like a pancake. So, you know, I've done some research, and it seems like a hive can be in snow, and people say it's really good because it'll insulate it. But if we're talking 6 feet of snow, and I'm not talking physically about the structure of the hive, but can bees breathe with 6 feet of snow? Well,
they can breathe an amazingly high concentration of carbon dioxide, unlike humans, but they can suffocate. I've seen pictures and seen the forums on women's beekeeping Facebook page that I'm on, where gals back east have just dug out the tops of their colonies and the front entrance and let the rest of it stay covered in the snow. Peter, Amy, Beth, anybody else have anything else to add on that?
I was just going to put a link from a beekeeper in Saskatchewan. This is Adoni. And you'll see that he actually shovels, he goes out and he kind of like piles snow on the colonies. And oftentimes there'll be a little bit like the bees will just open a hole there. They don't suffocate. That's Saskatchewan snow, not Washington snow.
Sorry, I don't have a great answer for you on that, but I just make sure that the upper entrance is open.
okay, and so that's an issue too. Once the snow starts falling, the only way up is something with tracks. So a snowmobile or snowshoes. So I go up maybe once a month in the winter, but you know, it's a 3-mile hike all up with snowshoes. So yeah, I won't be around much to dig it out. So
chances are good that the front of the colony is going to stay open.
I could be able to pitch in, but I have snow that's closer to the Saskatchewan snow here. What I have done, and I don't know if that can work for you, William, but that works really well on my end, is I actually have a shed over them, which prevents the hives from being covered in snow. They're more exposed to cold, but then the roof, which is human-sized roof, allows them to be less prone to moisture actually, and less prone to snow. So the hives stay above snow, even though the accumulated snow we have in our yard here is usually about 4 to 5 feet in the winter.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually in the process of building a structure. And even if I don't need it for the snow, like if it's not such a severe winter, I need it for shade in the summertime because they'll just be, just boiling in the sun. So thank you. I'll let
Thanks,
you all know
Bobby.
how it goes.
Perfect. Robert, I think you're up next, and then Cynthia.
Hi, Tracy. I just have a quick question about the robbing screens because you mentioned them in your statement a little bit ago. When would you take those off?
Sometimes I've left them on all winter.
Okay.
Usually what I do is I take them off in November after a couple really hard freezes and all the yellow jackets are gone.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen any yellow jackets, so I was just curious.
Yeah, usually that's when I take mine off. For those of you that have your colonies where there's a lot of mice, it's a good idea to replace your robbing screen with mouse guards around November as well, because the mice will get in there and then they'll create this really nice mouse nest on the bottom, and the bees will coexist in the top of the condo. And it's really disgusting when you open your colony up and you've got lots of mouse poop in the bottom.
Thank you, Tracy.
Sure. Cynthia?
I wanted to ask you, well, one, I wanted to tell you that I had COVID 3 weeks ago, and I still have that cough, that tickle. I hate it.
Sorry.
Anyway, I wanted to ask you about like hive cozies for insulation.
Yeah, not necessary around here. In fact, moisture is the problem here, not cold.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Interestingly, the cozies keep it warmer in there, but the problem is then the bees will eat more food too. The warmer they are, the more food they eat. So really, our temperatures in the mid 30s and 40s is a really good temperature for bees to be out in the winter, because then they don't eat as much food. So raise your hand if you got down on the bottom, if you click on reactions, you can raise your hand. Raise your hand if you bought Italian bees this year. Nobody wants to admit that they bought Italian bees this year? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead and put your hands down. The reason I ask isn't that buying Italian bees is bad. It's just that Italian bees eat more food in the winter because they usually go into the winter with a bigger cluster than those carniolan bees. So carniolans are more conservative on the food. So food is much more of an issue over the winter, and starvation is an issue in the spring with the Italian bees because they eat more food. So the warmer they are, the more food they eat. So just think about that when you're adding emergency storage and emergency food in there, on whether your bees have enough. Peter, Amy, Beth, you want to add stuff, please?
I just wanted to point out, because I'm not sure you've seen, that there are questions in the chat as well.
Oh, I thought you guys were doing that. All right, perfect.
And I can add something really quick if it's
yeah,
okay.
great.
One of the additional benefits of letting your bees get cold in the winter, they will keep the interior of the cluster, and it will help control varroa going into the spring.
Yep. Thanks, Don. All right, let's take a couple out of the chat. So Amanda says, I'm having a hard time imagining how I'll go about condensing the hive down for winter without being very disruptive and to the order of frames. How and when do we condense? So as the bees population naturally starts to go down this month and next month, you'll notice that there's not as many bees covering all those frames. So you don't have to worry about reordering your frames. In fact, I go ahead and do that. I move all of the, I pull it out and I move all the brood down to the bottom box. And then I put a frame of honey on either side. And then I start moving up with resources and stores. Now, if you've got a honey arch, remember that the bees won't, the queen won't cross that. So you want to keep all your brood together and then honey and empty frames up above. It shouldn't be that difficult, you know, late next month to reduce down to those 1 or 2 deeps or 2 or 3 mediums. Let's see, scrolling down here. Let's see, Toby, why don't you ask your question and then I'll find another question out of the chat.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
So my question, I combined hives and they had very little brood, but they have decent stores. And so I might end up with more frames of honey than I could fit if I do the couple on each side and the ones over the top. If that's the case, do I freeze them? Do I save them till spring? I don't really want to take them because I figure they might need them later. Plus I had Apigard in there or something. I treated when I had honey on because I didn't expect to take them. So what do I do with that?
Well,
and
so if you have room to freeze them, that'd be a great spot for them. Or you could freeze them for a couple days to make sure to kill any wax moth larvae, and then you could put it in one of those big storage bins with that seal. They have some nice ones now that medium frames fit in really well, and then they've got those snap-on latches and the foam around the middle to keep the ants and the wax moths out. That's a good option.
And then like if once we start cresting 50 in the spring, but it's not, you know, abundant nectar or anything, if I could pop some in, or I could put another box on top and give them some,
Yeah,
okay,
you can
cool.
totally do that. Or you can, you know, in the spring, it's not cold that kills bees because they don't have much brood going on in there. So you don't have to worry about the cold to pop the, and we'll talk about this later, but you could always pop a couple of those frames down in there.
Okay. And my bees, I don't know if they got eaten by yellow jackets or what, but there was brood. And then suddenly I'm not seeing, like, I didn't see a big population explosion, but I don't see much brood in my hive. So I don't feel very optimistic. So I can also save it for next year's colonies.
If you've got eggs, you know, you've got a queen, right?
Yeah.
But if you've only got capped brood and no eggs, I'd look for my queen and make sure you didn't lose your queen.
Yeah, I didn't see much of either, but I did combine them and I figured I'll give them some time to get through that and then see what I see. But I just wonder, I have ferocious yellow jackets, even with robbing screens, and they would eat the brood, right?
Yeah, they'll eat the bees too. So one way to tell if you've got yellow jackets getting in there, if you can't visually watch them go in there, is put a sticky board underneath there.
Legs and wings everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
You bet. Let's see. Amy's asking, wondering about winter patties. So, or no. Who? Amy wrote that? Yeah. Amy, what are you wondering about winter patties?
Martin Kahn was asking you to talk about winter patties. I was just pointing that out.
Oh, that was Amy Beth. My bad.
So
all I can see is Amy in little blue letters here.
Yeah. Sorry.
my bad. So winter patties are like summer patties in how they look, but they're very different in the amount of protein content. Winter patties are mostly sugar with a little bit of protein. And summer patties have a much higher concentration of protein, and they they invigorate the queen and the colony to start, raising more brood. So if you want to use winter patties, that's perfectly fine. What a lot of people do is they'll put a bunch of white sugar on top, and then maybe one winter patty. It's a lot cheaper to use sugar, table sugar, than buying those winter patties, but it's certainly another option. And I always keep some winter patties on hand so that when I do my sneak peek on Valentine's Day after I snap my picture, I look in there and then I slide a pollen patty in there if they're short on food. So winter patties aren't a bad way to go. You just want to make sure that if you're storing them in your freezer that you don't get them mixed up with your summer patties. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Martin.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Toby, do you have another question? Is your hand still up from before?
Sorry, my bad.
No, no problem.
I should probably step in so we can be on time for Anthony.
It's about time, so I will adjourn and get some.
I'm gonna say that already. I didn't mean to say anything. I'm Kit Hyatt. I'm the president of Puget. Thank you, Tracy. By the way, Puget Sound Beach. Those of you who are new, which
You're freezing.
plan for the November annual business meeting when we, it says my internet connection is unstable and I don't, that's not good.
Yeah, it's due for quite a while there, Kit.
Oh, really? I wonder why. I thought maybe it was Dawn being way north that made her unstable, but I guess it's me. So can you hear me now?
We can, but can you start over because we missed it all.
Okay. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that PSBA is a nonprofit and we are a 501c3 and everyone involved is a volunteer. And coming up for our next business meeting is November for a we elect the 2023 board of directors, which includes trustees, and trustees are those who don't really hold a title, but they're very involved with all of the goings on and decisions that we make as a club. And so we really need new blood and new interest. And I have a feeling there are already some people percolating. I just would love that you attend the meeting and even just listen to see if this is something that you can grow into, or if it feels good once you've heard the conversation to get involved right away. And there, I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating that there are several bee clubs around Washington State that have closed up because, and other nonprofits too. There's just a lot fewer people in the positions that they were in. They've moved on, or a lot of their support have moved on, and it's led to fewer people at the top to do the work. And PSBA is in a wonderful position to have some real strength, but that's kind of to just know that your community needs you. That's, I guess, my bottom line. I sent out a note about an opportunity for free diagnostics. Most the only persons, however, the beekeepers that qualify for Kelly Kulhanick to come and visit your bee yard have to have 8 colonies or more. So I think that's an efficiency effort. She's trying to just really get a lot of quantity of data in order to figure out what's going on in Western Washington bee yards. So if there is anybody out there with enough bees to qualify, let me know and I'll put you on the calendar for Kelly's visit at the end of October. The last 2 weeks, she's not sure exactly when. Kelly spoke with us in June of 2021. She is with Washington State University, and she was selected as the new professor for a new position that is in charge of this kind of data collection and understanding of the hobby beekeepers situation, which is really wonderful to have. We haven't really, it always feels like WSU has an orientation around commercial beekeeping and without as much attention to hobby beekeepers. So it's really wonderful that they're helping out to try and give us some diagnostic support. So reach out to me for that. That's about all I have there. And with that, I think, is Anthony here? I don't see.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good. Oh, there you are.
There's so many people in the meeting that it's hard to, it's bewildering.
Yeah, you're in that upper corner. I see you.
Yeah.
Anthony, would you like it if some of us stick around with our video showing so you have people to talk to? Or that's something that I've learned is really valuable on Zoom calls.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I know.
I'm so sorry I couldn't be there.
Yeah, well, that would be nice if we could all be together at the University of Washington. I would love nothing more than that. But short of that, here we are, and it is wonderful to have you. I'm excited for your presentation. I understand that it's full of, I've got my notepad ready. I'm going to take some notes. I'm just certain I'm going to learn a lot. So
thank you so much. I'm so glad. Yep.
Pass the baton to you, Anthony. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I just want to echo what I thought that was really wonderful what Kit said about the importance of the bee clubs. And I think particularly coming out, of the pandemic, we don't have a lot of civil social organizations left that you can get together and share common interests. It'd be really tragic to see, some new leadership not materialize and support the bee club. So please, even if you have just kind of, oh, I'm just starting, but you have some organizational skills, that's all you need. We just need people. You just need people who can do, know how to run things. So please step up, get your nominations in. November AGM is going to be hot, let me tell you.
That's awesome, Anthony. Thank you. You see it from a bigger picture, I'm sure, and
oh, yeah.
I appreciate that.
No, it is so important. You put it so well. Okay, I'm going to start my presentation here, and hopefully, I was asked to talk. We're going to go back to school because I do think, in some ways, there's get some of the fundamentals, especially around brood diseases. And so that's what I want to cover. Start my presentation. And can you all see it? It doesn't appear as a
I see
backwards. You don't see like my slides. You see my slide.
I see brood diseases 101.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. So the first thing is, I just want to point out, we actually have a really great apiculture lab at Oregon State University. I'm in a different lab. I'm in the lab, and I often don't get to speak about apiculture issues, although it's really where my heart and passion lies. So thanks for having me today. I'm talking about a topic that I've thought about for over 2 decades. I've been really in love with is bee diseases. How can you be in love with bee diseases? Well, I just am. They're so curious and so strange. And I also just love what we're going to be talking about today, how you can solve these problems without getting overwhelmed. So we're going to start by just I want you to be able to leave here today. And many of you may have a lot of experience, but you should be able to diagnose the major bee diseases before you leave. The other thing is I don't want you to know the quizquilia of like bee disease life cycles. I want you to know just enough so that you can cut these disease cycles in half and have healthy bees. So we're just going to cover like the brass tacks of it. And then I'm going to go over 7 techniques that you can manage these problems without getting overwhelmed, because seriously, why did we get into beekeeping? It was not to manage varroa mite, and it was not to manage bee diseases. It was to make, to justify to our spouse why we spent so much money on beekeeping equipment in the first place. So let's get to that and try to get through bee diseases really simply. So let's talk about diagnosis to begin with. And I don't know if this is going to work. I do have this thing here, and I've got some quiz questions that come up. Why don't you just try this? Like, take your phone and kind of line it up with that QR code. What that'll allow me to do is that I can then go, I have some questions I want to, look at, I can see Amy, Beth, and Peter. Thank you so much, on the couch with their phones, doing the QR code. Just hold your phone up, hit that QR code, and I think what's going to happen is following. I'm going to stop sharing for just, I'm going to do this, and share this. I'm going to go right here. Share. Okay, here we go. Okay. Oh, thank you, Anonymous. Okay, here we're going to do our first question. First thing is, and I'm sure, I want to know how many years you've been keeping bees, just so I have a sense of the room. Maybe you haven't started yet. Maybe you're in your first year, you're in 2 to 5 years, or you're more than 5 years. And what I quickly see, for those of you who are just starting, 2 to 5 years, you're in your first year or haven't started, this is why you join a bee club. Look at that. You have a lot of experience in the room, as you saw, in the session before. Trouble, problem solve. Okay, so we've got here a great mix of beekeepers, kind of towards the more experienced group. Haven't started yet. Finished my first year. Okay, let's move on to our next poll question, which is, I want to know, and this is going to help me, which brood disease do I need the most help with? One possibility is you're new to this and you're not sure. Another is American foul brood, European foul brood, chalk brood, sac brood. Which one of these are kind of befuddling you the most? And it'll give me a sense of where I need to hit. And also, it's just very cool to see European foul brood, a real reversal from maybe 20 years ago, when American foul brood would have been at the top of everybody's list. European foul brood. Okay, well, we'll get into European foul brood, and I'm going to say, as we go through the presentation, I'll just share my presentation here. Can I just do this effortlessly? I can't. Okay, so as we go through the presentation, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have some more quiz questions as we go along, but I just want to make sure that you have opportunities to ask questions. It's going to be punctuated throughout this presentation. Is going to be the word question. Use the chat lively, and I'm going to rely on Kit to, when the questions come up, to read the questions to me so I'm not too distracted. Okay. The first thing, for those of you who are new, there's important when we're thinking about brood diseases of what does normal brood look like, because oftentimes things that many people sense are abnormalities are perfectly normal. So, we start with eggs, the larvae are developing, and then, the cell starts to get capped. And I think one key aspect, and we'll cover this at length, is the position of the larva in the cell when it comes to brood diseases. If you understand the kind of contortion a larva goes through at this stage when it's just being capped, it'll help you with your diagnosis. So for those of you who are brand new, we're seeing, you can see there are some larvae that have gone to the prepupal stage that are capped, but we have still larvae in the C shape that are just in the process of being capped. And this is the important thing I do almost think is the most important aspect of bee disease diagnosis, is understanding what is happening to your larva when the cell gets capped. So Most of you who've looked in a colony know to the 5th instar, it's visible to your eye, the bees are in a C shape. But as soon as that cell is capped, the bee is going to do a contortion, it's going to go onto his back and it's going to lay flat and spin it. It's going to defecate and spin its cocoon and undergo metamorphosis. Some bee diseases are going to kill somewhere between this stage and when it goes flat, and that's going to be diagnostic. Laying flat on a cell, is it in a C shape or is it in some position in between? That's going to be a big clue as to what goes on. So let's look at this. How do people feel about this frame? Is there any problems with this frame? You can just type in the chat if you think you spot something, or if you think, no, this is a professor playing a cruel trick on me. There's no problem at all with this frame. You say, yes, you're happy. This is a good frame. This is a bad frame. Okay. Toby Nelson says, great. Patrick Moore says, no law around the capped brood. Okay. Any other opinions on this? I won't call your names out. Okay, great. Another person points out that there are some dead pupa in some of the empty cells in the brood area. Okay, this is actually almost perfect. Invariably, there's going to be 1 or 2 holes in a sealed brood nest. And what has happened here is that, this may have just been some of these cells. You can see here, there's a little bit of, it's a little bit lightening. There may be bees starting to emerge, but by and large, this is a very good frame with no problem. So when you see a frame like this with a couple of misses, that's okay. So these normal misses in the occur, and I don't understand why they occur. So it could be there's some diploid drones, some some of the sperm's incompatible. Once in a while there's a miss. She just missed it, like that might happen. These occasional misses are nothing to be worried about. So let's look at let's look at these pictures. So, what you're going to do when you're inspecting a frame is you need to get the bees off. And one thing, if you have not learned this and you go to the bee school, is learn how to use the quick flick of your wrist to shake the bees into the box so that you can expose the brood so that you can inspect it. But let's say you do that and you see this. Is there a problem here? And just go into your chat and just, you're not supposed to shake your head. I'll see you. There's no problem here. For those of you who are beginning, you're looking at this frame and you're like, but there's a patch opening up. If you look around the edges, there are bees that are emerging. This was a sealed frame maybe a day ago. Tomorrow, this patch may be expanded greatly because the bees are just completing their development and they're emerging, and likely there are eggs being laid in the frame. This is totally normal. Little blonde babies. Yes, they are beautiful. I did buy some, the question came, I did buy some Cordovan. I'm from Oregon State University. Oranges are colors. I thought I'd go orange this year. But anyways, nice blonde bees, nice frame. So that ring around there, in case you missed it, if you're beginning, that's brood that's set to emerge. And the emerged brood you can see in the middle. What about this? Is this a brood disease? Who thinks, say yes, no in the chat, is this a brood disease? I have old frame. That's from a dead out. No. I've heard rumors of this Puget Sound Beekeeping Association. You guys are very smart. There's no brood disease here. In fact, a comb like this, typically what you'll see, this is after winter, if the bees die in the comb because they run out of food, oftentimes, there'll be bees still kind of clustered around in the frames. they will attract moisture. And when you go and clean the dead out, and I see somebody said this is from a dead out, Patrick pointed that out, that a little bit of mold will grow there. You can actually put that back into a colony. The mold will be cleaned out. This is not a brood disease. This is okay. Oh, and there you see, I forgot I had this image. Here's what, this is kind of what you have. It's a cluster of dead bees run out of food, and they just kind of trap some moisture. The mold grows in. Bees will clear that out when you put live bees back on it. Wait, what about this? Is this a brood disease? Yes, no, maybe, I don't know, not enough context. So that's great. Yeah, Sven points out that this may not have anything to do. For those of you who are looking at this for the first time, there's on previous frames, there are spots. Spots in the brood where can be caused by a number of things. It can be a brood disease, but it could also be, as many people point out, a queen running out of sperm. Or the other thing is, first thing in the spring when your colonies start up, they have a hard time thermoregulating, and oftentimes you can have brood like this. The first cycle looks a little bit patchy, and then it kind of becomes more solid. But this is something to pay attention to, and it's a key principle. You're kind of looking for disruptions in that solid brood pattern is sort of your first clue to look more clearly. So really, you need to go through your colonies periodically and go through the brood nest. And I would say, I like to go through my brood nest and do a complete inspection at least 3 times a year. I like to do it in the spring when the brood nest is started up. I like to do it before I'm really getting, putting on a lot of honey supers in the colonies gotten going. And then in the fall, I like to go one more time. And I mean, go frame by frame, just inspect frames and look for problems. And I'm going to cover 4 of the most common problems today. I'm going to start with what I consider the most damaging problem. It's American foul brood. So with American foul brood, oftentimes you're going through a colony, and you're going to notice something like this. You're coming through the colony and you see that spotty brood pattern. There's something going on here. It's just like you immediately notice. Maybe there are a couple of good frames, but you'll come to a frame and it's spotty. And you start to notice a few of these frames. And you might see something like this where most of the brood should have emerged, but there's a whole bunch of cappings just kind of laying around there that didn't seem to emerge. And also, to look more closely, there's something wrong with the cappings. Oftentimes, you'll see that there's a kind of jagged edge. Remember when we saw a cell that was being closed? It was in the process of being closed. It's kind of a perfectly round closure. Look at these closures. They're ragged. They're opened. Something's been picking at them. And so what you do is you kind of go in a little bit closer, and it's nice to have a toothpick or some, blade of grass. You peel back the comb and you start to notice something like this. This is the early stages of American foul brood. You see a larva. Well, it's a prepupa and it's coffee shaped. And note how it's laying. It's laying flat on the cell, flat on the bottom of the cell. And so you poke around a little bit more and you see a lot of other things going on. In fact, you kind of see this whole thing that's going on between here, looking at the bottoms of the cell. Some of them are kind of a coffee brown, like I just showed you. Some of them are kind of mottled brown, and some of them have become so dark and brittle, they're stuck to the bottom of the cell. So you have this whole range of things. And one way to think about this is that when a bee dies of American foul brood, starts off as a kind of gooey, viscous mass, but as soon as it's uncapped, it starts to dry into what's known as a scale. Now, these scales can be easy to spot on white comb, but they become very hard to spot when you have dark old comb. It's almost hard to see it. And all I'm looking for here is I see the bottom looks a little bit roughed up, and it's very subtle at this point. You almost need to have light comb to really see it, the scale clearly. And the scale itself is unlike anything else in that it strongly adheres to the bottom of the cell. If you go in there with a toothpick and try to dislodge it, it will not come out very easily. You almost have to break the bottom of the cell from the bottom, and then this flake will come out. The other thing I want to point out about this is bees are in a constant race to dispose of the stuff. So here you can see a scale. So I told you it starts off as a gooey thing. It then dries down into a scale, and the bees start to chip away at it. So you can see this one has been chipped away half the way back, and there's probably some more that it's almost towards the back of the cell. It disappears. It isn't static. Bees are constantly trying to remove it. So the thing is, it's on the bottom of the cell, and if you just look from the wrong angle, you wouldn't catch it. What you're trying to do with your eye is see these little kind of ends here to spot the scale. So what you want to do is you don't want to do what I'm doing in A, bees covering the comb, looking at it straight on. You want to get the sun behind you. You want to get the bees off, and you want to look at it from the side. And again, why we're doing this is because this disease every time kills a larva when it's laying flat. There's only a couple diseases that do this. This one, every time it's going to be like this. What you're trying to do is your eye is trying to catch the tip of this. You're looking across the frame, looking for looking for this stuff. And this is a very nice graphic from a USD publication that just shows you the process. It starts off healthy, it gets disease, it turns a little bit brown, and then it sinks and sinks into a puddle and then dries into a hard scale. Any questions? I'm going to go into the disease cycle, and maybe I just want to make sure it wasn't too dense. Is that any questions at this point? No burning question. Let's get AFB's life cycle done, and maybe that'll answer any questions you have. Now, the cycle starts like this. It's in the same group as anthrax. If you know anything about anthrax, it's got a spore, waits in the grass for a long time for something to eat it, and then it does its damage. Same thing with American foul brood. It forms one of the most resilient spore of any of the critters that attack bees. People have been able to isolate it out of honey that's 100 years old. So it's a very resilient little spore, and this somehow enters your colony, which we're going to talk about a little bit when we come to the end on how to solve this problem. But it makes its way in. Now what happens is, the first thing that happens is that the larva, the bees, nurse bees, the young bees, have to somehow drop it off at the first instar larva. Second instar larva, it can be fed lots of spores and they won't get infected. That first instar is the instar that is susceptible. Then what happens is it grows, and on the top you can see a healthy pupa. And this is a little bit misleading. If the spore load is light, the bee will make its way all the way to pupation, and you'll see, something like this where the bee is dying, its tongue is extended, and many of you may have heard of this. When a bee dies of American foul brood, its tongue is sticking out. It's very rare, in fact. That happens only with a very kind of strange infections, but nevertheless, the pupa or pupa starts to melt, and then the bees start to chip away at the cell. This is the point that you're noticing something's wrong, seeing the chipping at the front of the cell. And then the capping kind of gets chipped away and the thing turns into scale. And then the last thing, the critical thing, is that which bees are doing your nursing. The first thing a bee does when it emerges is it cleans out the cell. The next task it does is it nurses. The bee goes in, tries to clean this stuff up, and then the next job it does is nurse. And then this disease just kind of goes, the cycle just goes out of control. Antibiotics are used solely at this stage. So they're meant, antibiotics stop the vegetative growth. So you flush it through the system, And then the larvae that are getting the antibiotic won't get infected. But if the spores are still present in the colony, as soon as the antibiotic wears out, the spores will start the cycle again. So there they are. There's that poor bee. She's covered with, she's cleaning out that larva, and then she's going to go on and nurse. I've done this before when I was working in northern Canada. Here you can see I have first instar larva. I'm spraying the spores on the bees, and I'm spraying spores all over the place. And let me just show you what happens. You don't see anything to begin with. The brood. This is really important. This is like fine point AFB. The first kind of sealing up of cells is solid. It's only at about 3 weeks after, the eggs are hatched that you start to see kind of patches in the brood. It doesn't appear immediately. So if you have a colony with AFB, you have a nice clean frame, it looks very solid, and you think, well, this frame isn't infected. It probably is. It just hasn't gotten old enough to start to see, the bees detect problems, start throwing larvae out and opening cells. Okay, death occurs quite late in the stage, 3 to 4 weeks. It's close to emergence when the bees really start opening things up. Now there was a question here: was the queen cup there already? I think so. I don't know. Maybe. Good question, Dawn. Let's just. I can't put my finger on the queen cup to take your attention away from it, but it may have been, well, it's not the same comb as I just sprayed. Okay, so let's just sum this up. When you're looking for AFB, you're looking for irregular patterns in sealed brood. Remember, what you see on the left is regular. We're looking for punctured and patchy brood patterns. As soon as you see that, you should stop what you're doing and really inspect every comb. And when you look for the comb, the one thing I failed to mention is, unlike a lot of the diseases, American foul brood, when it is still viscous and it hasn't dried down completely, is very viscous. So you can put something like a stick in there, and oftentimes you'll just see, unlike anything else, like if you look, we'll talk about sac in a bit, you take a stick and you put it into sac brood, it just leaks. If you put it into European foul brood, it's kind of chunky and fillet-like. But you put a stick into American foul brood and it's thick and viscous. There's no other brood disease that's thick and viscous. Even when you have like a colony of varroa mites and you have kind of awful looking brood, it's still it's got some, it's kind of flaky or something. It's not like this. It doesn't turn into like a thick thing. And the other thing I'll point out is when there's a lot of well, I'd say almost all stages, it can give quite an odor. It's unmistakable. And I would encourage you, if American foul brood is found somewhere in the club, to retain the comb and at least have people take a smell. As soon as you've split, it's kind of like a unique smell that American foul brood, a colony that really starts to get an infection going, you can smell it. So what do you do? Oops, I'm having some, maybe this will work better. Okay. You find American foul brood. I think I wasn't aware of the project at WSU, and it's really great that you have a new extension apiculture person in Washington. It's going to be a really great benefit to all of you. But you can also send samples free of charge to the USDA Bee Lab. This is in the days before plastic foundation, but you take a chunk of the comb, the whole comb that's got the disease on it, and then you wrap it in newspaper, not plastic, so it doesn't get moldy. You remember when you include the name, your contact information, yard location, and date. And whenever you're handling American foul brood, the spores are infectious. And so it's important to disinfect your hive tool and gloves. And I will say the key thing with American foul brood is you want to get the wax off. You're not worried that you want to get the big chunks of wax that can retain some of the spores. You're not like, it's not like invisible, I don't know, like radiation. It's like you want to get big chunks of wax, the honey off your gloves, take your hive tool, put it in your smoker, melt that wax off. And then you want to move that colony to an isolated location, and likely what you'll be doing is killing that colony. I'm going to give you solutions besides killing the colony that can work. So you go, if you go to find this, you go to the Bee Research Laboratory website. They have a disease diagnosis service, and they'll help you out there. They'll also test it for antibiotic resistance, because there are strains of American foul brood that are resistant to oxytetracycline. And finally, before I go to questions on American foul brood, this, this would have looked like, nobody would have known what this was, a while ago. Sure looks like a COVID test, but no, it's a test for American foul brood, and you can buy them at the bee supply places. You kind of pick the larva up, you put it in this. You don't have to put it up your nose, fortunately. You put it in this little bottle and shake it around. The beads will pulverize the larva. You take some of the solution up, you put it into this COVID kit for AFB, and it will tell you if it's AFB. It's quite reliable. Okay, that's American foul brood. What do you guys have for questions? Okay, so there's a couple here. So Toby, if you want to unmute and ask your question, that's also good as well. Otherwise, I'll read it out. Okay, so Toby asks, so you've had AFB in your apiary. Would the spores be in the grass around old disease hives? And also, what does T and C stand for on the test strips? Okay, so the one thing I'll say with American foul brood is it is a very long-lasting spore, but I have worked with it a lot, and I have to tell you, I've tried to infect colonies with American foul brood with like millions of spores. I remember the first time I tried to do it by putting it into syrup, I couldn't get the colony infected. And so we ended up spraying it on the comb because that was the most reliable way of passing things around. I'll get into this a little bit more, but not all routes are equally as effective. And you don't have to worry about it being on the grass or any of that. That's not how the infection is going to start. It's going to start by comb transfer. Really, American foul brood is the #1 way to transmit it is either it's in pollen that you've trapped under an AFB infected colony, or you've taken comb from one place to another. That's how you're going to spread it, not by any other way. Even drift is, the spores spread, but it doesn't really leads to an infection. On the test things, I think C is the control, T is the test. So if you get 2 lines, just like with the COVID test, then you've got AFB. And if you have 1 line, which on the C, it just says the test is good. Amy asks, Amy, do you want to ask your question out loud, or?
We were just mentioning if people need the little AFB test kits, we often have a lot on hand, or we always have some on hand. And if they have AFB questions, because we had it in 2020 and want someone local to chat with,
We're happy to talk.
Yes.
And we usually have the test kits if you're desperate.
So just wanted to offer that.
Thank you. See, another benefit of a bee club, and I think it's really great to have someone with local experience. It's one of those, once you have it, you kind of know it, but you see it in a slideshow or you read it out of a book. It doesn't make sense. You have to see it.
Yeah, that's why we were one of the ones that said, we actually have more questions about EFB because it stumps us more because we've had to figure this out some. And then I saw Don had a great question about how common is AFB too, because I know it's hard to figure out where on the spectrum of how worried should I be about it. Is that the most likely thing, but it's also really bad?
You guys could probably answer in your region. It flares up once in a while, and we had one in Portland, and it was one person who was selling nukes who had it, and it went everywhere. And so I'll just tell you, there are key points where you're going to get it. You're unlikely to get it in a package. You're likely to get it in a nuke, and you're likely to get it when buying used comb. So in both of those cases, buying nukes and used comb, get an experienced member of the club to go with you. Because if they can look through it and say it's clean, then you're going to avoid it. That's really the #1 place you're going to get it. Bruce, you've got your hand up. You have some hand here.
Oh, there we go. I've got a couple questions. One of them is, you mentioned sanitizing your tools, but what about your gloves? Do you have a way to do that?
I'm a little bit nonplussed about it, but I think what I would do is if you had the big thing is you want to get any kind of chunks off. You want to get chunks of wax. And what I would do is just to be safe, bleach will disinfect spores, but I would say don't just kind of like surface them, get the stuff off there, like kind of work out the big chunks of wax that are going to fall out, and then you'll be safe. If you're really paranoid about it, well, I would say, if you've only got 2 colonies and they're your babies, then just buy some new gloves. But because as soon as you like take gloves and put them in bleach or washing machine, they're wrecked anyway. So
Yeah. Alcohol won't work, I gather. Is that right?
that's right. Not for this, not for the spores. It's alcohol just bounces off them. I think I remember it actually, they do really good in alcohol, if I remember. I used to store them in alcohol.
Okay. Next question is, you're talking about exchanging combs. What about, I'm assuming that you meant brood combs, but what about extracting combs? Is it likely to be spread through those?
Yeah, unlikely. If you're making honey off a colony with AFB, the thing is, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, and I don't want to here all night, but the one thing that they noticed early on in the 30s, how your honeybee adults have a proventriculus valve? At the back of the honey stomach, there's this thing, it looks like alien, and it goes through it and it picks stuff out of the honey stomach and it puts it into the rectum. That's why you can't infect honeybee colonies readily by feeding syrup, because they take anything that's kind of spore-like, and that's when we talk about the shook sperm method of kind of getting rid of AFB. If adults have enough time, they'll take all the spores out of the system and put it in their rectum. And so honeycomb is a real low risk comb. And so it's really a comb that's had infection on it, and experienced member of your club will be able to spot that. Great questions.
Okay, and there was another thought that I had too, and that is, what about the equipment? Suppose you've gotten an infected equipment and you want to cut the comb out, but you want to reuse the frames in the box. Do you have any ideas on what works to keep them clean?
Yeah, I have a little video on torching boxes, but I get rid of the comb. It's not worth it. Get rid of the comb. Just throw the comb away.
I'm not talking about the comb. I'm talking about the comb. I'm talking about the frame. So you've got your cutting.
Get the frame. Just chuck it. It's just like not worth it. Just get rid of the frame. Torch the. It could take scorch the box if you must, but get rid. It's just the frame is the way the infection spreads. Frame is number one. And I know the outside you're like, but there's little bits and pieces there. Just it, I think.
Okay, thank you.
And don't worry about the spores that fall in the grass, but worry about the comb. I would. There are ways of like, I think there's a hot wax. You can take things in hot wax for 20 minutes. It's just like not worth it. Just get rid of it. And I guess there's one last question about hygienic behavior. I'm going to just hold off on that. I'm going to raise hygienic behavior, and it does work great. Hygienic behavior in AFB, it's an excellent mechanism. So it really is, all bees will poke cells that contain AFB, but these bees will hit it at the urge before spore formation, and that's how they cut the disease cycle. Okay. How are we doing for time, Kit? When should we wrap this up?
Well, we can go till 9 o'clock. It's wonderful.
Okay.
You're just getting going. Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's talk about European foul brood, and let's spend some time on it. I know this has been an issue in the Pacific Northwest. It's gotten worse and worse for, since I've been here at OSU for 6 years. So it's a way more complicated disease. It's not straightforward at all. Here we have out of the classic Bailey and Ball honeybee pathology from 1991, no book without any equal in the present day after all of the work that's been done on bee diseases. We got on the right, the normal thing that happens. You get a honeybee larva, it grows, and it's got bacteria. As we now know, there's all sorts of things living in the larval gut. And, it's got a certain kind of bee fauna in it, and it goes to capping, and here it goes. So that gets capped and adult, out it pops. With European foul brood, it can go a couple different ways. One way is goes to the larva, and it starts to compete. So the way European foul brood works is that the bacteria is competing for nutrition with the larva. Sometimes there's a lot of nutrition or the inoculum isn't strong. And the thing is, it goes all the way to capping. See, it just gets capped. And if it gets capped, it does turn into adult. But what they notice, and I've seen this once in a while, and I don't know if this is true but this is what they say. In Bailey and Ball, the classic thing, they say you get these honeybees that pop out that are tiny. They're just like half-size runts because they've been kind of starved to death, but they make it to adulthood. But in the process of doing this, what happens is that they say when the disease is light and there's nutrients coming in, this prepupa is able to defecate and transmit the disease. So when this bee comes out, it kind of starts to cycle around the colony. When food resources are tight or the inoculum is heavy, this larva is going to go to the C-shaped, and then it's going to die. And when it dies, it may look a couple different ways depending on what bacteria invade the larva. So it can look a bunch of different ways because then the bacteria that kills the larva, competes for food, is not the one that invades it. It doesn't form pure cultures. So sometimes it has variable appearance. But the one thing that is notable about it is it's dying when it goes from the C shape to when it's lying flat. So it has this corkscrew appearance. Very tricky stuff, whatever's going on with this. And so we've been seeing it. Myself and Dr. Sagili have been working in high bush blueberry, where our beekeepers are getting hammered by European foul brood by the end of pollination, to the point where a number of them have given up on blueberry pollination together. And this is what they see in their colonies. Now look at this. It's all over the place. It's like American foul brood, where it's a consistent symptomology. Here you've got one, it's kind of upside down. Like it's kind of like it's doing the back flop. It's not quite laying straight. It's not in a C shape. Here you have one that died kind of in the C shape. Here you got one that's kind of crooked. Here's one that's sideways. It seems to be killing the larva just as it's kind of like laying flat. So you get these strange contortions, and they call this in the textbook the corkscrew appearance. And some of them also, where the trachea are, you'll see some light coloration. Oftentimes when it dies, you see its gut totally inflamed. So it has this, looks like an egg yolk because it's got a lot of yellow in its gut. And what we were seeing with our beekeepers here and your beekeepers there, they come into blueberries, and this is 4 different blueberry farms. Each one of these dots is a colony. And this is the severity of European foul brood. So level 1 is up to 10 disease larvae. Level 2, I believe, is like 50, and level 3 is 100 disease larvae. You can see all the colonies in both years. This 2020, one colony came in with European foul brood. By the time they leave, most of the colonies have European foul brood. It happens every year. It happened this year. It's just really terrible. So Bailey and Ball had this hypothesis that the thing is, you really only see European foul brood when the disease is in decline. And so their theory was, when you have a lot more food coming into the colony, you get high survival of larvae, which causes the bees to defecate and spread the disease. If you have less food, then you start to have these bees that are dying in the corkscrew phase, and then the bees start to take them out, and the EFB starts to decline. And they said this because they noticed, and this was quite a few decades ago, and I think EFB's changed, that what ends up happening is EFB symptoms appear shortly after a honey flow. So after dandelions, UK, they would see the disease spike up and then it would disappear. And they theorized it was because they had this pulse of food that came through, lots of larvae propagated the disease, and then the starvation kind of like it broke the disease cycle because the larva didn't go to adulthood, and then they cleaned the disease up. So they have these classic graphs that, you're coming into the main nectar flow and the disease, is kind of spiking up, and then it just kind of like declines after the flow, after the peak of the flow. It's not kind of perfectly lined up with, how they described it, but they just noticed there's this, it seems to follow intense spring flows. There's another theory out there, and this one led to the invention of mega bee pollen patties. This is Gordy Wardell, who went on to work for a big almond company. But when he was at Michigan State University, he noticed another kind of thing that might explain the trend. So here he points out that this is the pH of the bee's gut, which he thought was being altered by the pollen. So he noticed that blueberry pollen is very alkaline. And so when he looked at, cycles of, when he would take larvae and look at, measure their gut pH and the level of the disease, that's the solid line. He noticed as the gut got more alkaline, the EFB would take off. And then after that, maybe that pollen got cleared up and became more acidic, then the disease would decline. And he said I could explain it this way, and he came up with acidified pollen patties as the way to deal with this. And I've seen a lot of studies that have looked at acidified pollen patties and it doesn't work. So I'll say that nobody quite understands what is causing this disease to come and go. But one thing that was recently discovered in British Columbia that I haven't updated here is that they've discovered there are strains of European foul brood in the Pacific Northwest, including samples from Oregon, that are resistant to oxytetracycline. And that might be one of the reasons why commercial beekeepers may be treating preventatively are starting to see this disease really start to pop up. But because they always relied on an antibiotic keeping it suppressed. Long and short of it is, I don't have a lot of great answers as to what's going on, and nobody really does. People say pesticides, people say blueberry pollen. I don't think anybody really has a great straight answer as to why European foul brood is spiking up. And I know one thing, it doesn't quite disappear like they did in the old days where you get a spike and then it would go. It kind of hangs around for quite a few weeks. But the main thing, for those of you who are starting, just remember this is going to be in a twisty corkscrew shape. You're going to have, oftentimes you'll have these kind of guts that it looks like an egg yolk. Like there's something, oh, here's a better one here, where the larva comes out. It just looks like there's something like too many sausages or something. It's like the guts involved. And you'll often see this real symptomatic kind of like, it looks like a crescent sideways in the comb. Okay. You can get scales once in a while. You can barely see it at the bottom. It will just flip out of the comb very easily, and lots of different symptomologies. Okay, so are there? So just to review: twisted in the cell, scales easy to remove, symptoms at least in the old days appeared when larvae hit a dearth or hit some kind of stress in the spring. And in the old days, when you had the disease go in outbreak, it would be the sign of the disease going into decline, although that decline is taking a lot longer than it used to. Any question about this very puzzling disease? So Dawn asked, if the well-fed brood spreads the disease within the colony, would a brood break fix it? I have never seen a study to that effect, Dawn, and it may be, and oftentimes we'll talk about this. One of the fix-all solutions to some brood diseases, especially viral diseases like sac brood or chalk brood, is to requeen. So I do wonder if that is something that could work. But Peter, you have your hand up, and I know you've mentioned that you're really interested in this disease. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, I've had, I guess I've had a little outbreak the last couple years that I've been trying a few different things for. It is very, and I've talked about it with PSBA leadership and other people. It's very hard with the changes to the federal requirements for getting antibiotics for hobbyists or even I'm going to say even mid-sized beekeepers. We don't have a veterinarian in Washington state, as far as I can tell, who's actually certified in honeybees. So it's really, really, really hard to find a vet to prescribe antibiotics. And it is, I haven't seen any great recommendations for how to deal with the disease without antibiotics. So I'm just curious if you have suggestions and thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'm going to talk. I do think, I've not seen a great study on comb replacement, but I do think comb replacement works for every other brood disease. That comb replacement during a heavy infection might be one way. It'll set the colonies back, the one way to do it without antibiotics. But I will point out that there's a lot of puzzling around the antibiotics themselves. When is this disease propagating? Like, when do you apply it? Because I have a sense that when people are applying antibiotics, the disease may already, like, the real pinch point would have been somewhere else, somewhere earlier in the cycle. I think the disease, like a lot of viral diseases, is circulating in the colony before you really see visible symptoms, because it comes up like clockwork every year, like that you can predict. I can tell you in the valley when it's going to appear. I just know when it's going to appear. And so it's not like it's kind of like it's being the inocula is already in the colony somewhere. It's spreading around. Oh, yeah, actually, what am I talking about? Yeah, there's a great study from the UK. It was done by I forgot about that. UK inspectors that tried shaking the bees onto new comb versus antibiotic versus doing both. And the shaking the bees onto new comb, and that was a very kind of drastic comb replacement, led to more better reductions and more that didn't come back the following season. I can share that with Kit after the meeting.
Thank you. One other just random question from my own observations. Curious whether it's something that is common or if it's anyway. When EFB does create a scale, I've been seeing in my colonies that the scale on the very, very bottom of the cells kind of looks like tiger striped, or kind of like a seashell almost, kind of around the very bottom. Is that something that's normal, or is that just a kind of weird thing that whatever strain I have is doing?
I don't see a lot of scale.
Okay.
I think it's because I'm in the yards at a point where it's really erupting. And so I don't know. But there is a lot of active work around strains. And I know there's one theory going around as to why it's a problem, is that there's an atypical strain that seems to be floating around the West. And so keep your eye on that. And, as the new, I can't remember the person's name. Who's the new WSU person? I would get the material to her.
It's Kelly Colhannock.
Yeah, I would definitely reach out, because it would be good because there's already active work happening in British Columbia and Oregon. It would be nice to get some active work in Washington. I think it is a kind of the main kind of brood disease problem we have, and just kinds of observations are good, because the way that strains can get sent to Saskatchewan. So there's a a lab in Saskatchewan that's doing all the genotyping. And so it would be great for Kelly to get the samples up through Saskatchewan and get some of the strains in Washington typed, because they'll do it for free.
Anthony, do you think that this is kind of why the new position has been created, is because of this new awareness of EDF? I mean,
I don't know. I'm on this side of the line. I don't know what's going on up there. It's good, but I don't know why.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Oh, no, not at all. There was another hand up, but it's gone down. But maybe that's. Oh, it says in California, we shook bees in the cardboard boxes. Okay, great. I'll talk about that in a bit. Patrick, this is totally anecdotal, but I've been shaking bees into new comb. And requeening my infected hives with quite good luck. Okay, so let's get into that in just a minute. Let's get through our other two diseases. Chalk brood. Now, most people don't know this. They think chalk brood is as old as the hills. It was here forever, but in fact, it's not. So here you can see, 1972. Look at this description. In late June 1971, a sample of a dead larva of the honeybee was sent for diagnosis at the PSBA Disease Investigations Laboratory at Laramie, that's going back a ways, by a commercial beekeeper in south central Nebraska. The diseased colonies were very slow in increasing their populations. The dead larvae were dried and had a somewhat spongy consistency. Most were chalk white on the dorsal surface and mottled with light brown on the ventral surface. A few were covered with black spots. Microscopic examination revealed that the larval bodies had compact masses of fungal mycelia that had dark spots, and the dark spots were fruiting bodies. Chalk brood didn't come to the US until the 70s. It's a recent disease. We had bees for hundreds of years in the US without chalk brood, and then it appeared. Drat. Anyways, another sad story. Chalk brood, as the description describes, it's a fungal disease. It goes into the larva, and what happens is it again goes into this flat stage. Prepupal lays flat, but then it kind of infected with the fungus, and the fungus fills the cell. Remember I told you AFB, it melts. EFB, it goes in a C shape. This kind of lays flat like AFB, but it kind of fills the cell, and it's actually a fungus. If you let it go wild in a petri dish, it just turns into a fuzzy mat. What you see in your colonies is they kind of fill whole cell, and their head capsule is kind of like shrunken down into, it's kind of hard to describe, but you'll know it when you see it. You'll see it actually before you see it in the frames. The bees are very good at pulling these out, and you'll see these little chalky little things on the bottom board. And as the description described, it can come in a white form. And then I don't understand fungus sex, it's kind of crazy, but sometimes things come together and positive and negatives, and they get it turns black. They both make spores, but sometimes you get these things and they turn black. And if you look in close, I just want to emphasize the key thing to know, it makes a lot of spores. So each one of those little mycelia has these balls. Inside these balls is like the mothership of spores. And the key thing to let you know is chalk brood is everywhere. You will not escape chalk brood. Chalk brood, it lives everywhere. It's in every crack and crevice. The reason you don't see chalk brood is because the bees regularly manage it. And another thing as well, temperature. This is one of the key things with chalk brood. Here's a study that was done years ago, and people have repeated this. And if you want to produce chalk brood, there's a real easy recipe for it. If you take a form of brood and you chill it before sealing, and I'm sorry I did not convert into Fahrenheit. I'm still my old Canadian ways. This is brood nest temperature. This is below brood nest temperature. Before sealing, you get a little bit of chalk brood. So mummification means 20% of the larva came down. If they got chilled, and I can't remember the period, but for a substantial time before sealing. But if they're chilled just as they're being sealed, look what happens. So here's brood nest temperature. You have no chalk brood. Same amount of there are tons of spores in this larva. They just don't develop. But as soon as you take it down to about room temperature, that brood, for a period of time, and it's not a very long, I think it's a couple hours at a lower temperature, the chalk brood explodes. This disease comes about because your brood nest gets chilled. And why? I guess I've challenged you, like, why would brood get chilled at capping? What do you do that causes this to happen? I guess if we were in a crowd, you would say to me all at once, well, it's when I make it split or something, and I've made it too heavy, or I've kind of like, I made a split in the yard and I put the bees over there and most of the bees drifted back. I get this imbalance in the brood nest so that the adult bees cannot keep that brood warm, and that's when this disease explodes. I was just doing this just before I got here. I got to find this paper. This is a really interesting paper that points, they did two things. They inoculated the brood nests with a suspension of chalk brood spores. They removed some of the workers to decrease the ratio of adults to brood, and a combination of the two, and had an untreated group. And what they found is both those factors, spores, but also the ratio of adults to brood, is what causes chalk brood to break out. So just to sum up, for chalk brood, it's easy to spot. You have a solid mummy. It's a filled cell. Think of a sort of sarcophagus or something. It's like filling it like a wrapped mummy. The spores almost always around. You can't get rid of them, and going to be when the brood is chilled. Any questions on chalk brood before we go to our last disease? Let's go to our last disease, sac brood. I'll be real quick about this because this is not a problem. Sac brood is not a problem, but it can the reason why I'm going to tell you about it is it's easily mistaken with American foul brood. They die at the same stage. They die laying flat, almost in the same orientation. And oftentimes people think they've got American foul brood and they have sac brood, but they are very easily told apart. The first one is, of course, a sac. Well, I've told you that this scale, it rarely forms a scale because bees can detect sac brood very easily, hygienic or not. And I'll talk about what hygienic behavior is in a minute. Sac brood gets removed almost immediately, but if you ever get to the point where it dries down to a scale, the scale is removed easily with blade of grass. Whereas with American foul brood, it's just stuck to the bottom of the cell. It has this characteristic look, and if you look at it, it's not brown, it's kind of a mottled color. The other thing is that what you'll see is just a whole lot of this on a frame. Just, it looks like they're kind of giving you the finger. They've kind of laid flat and they're just, like an Italian. They're holding up their arm at you, and they're almost, you see a whole bunch of them flush out, and it looks just horrible. And you think you've got a terrible problem. But when you look at it, it's kind of sac-like. And oftentimes, if you just put your toothpick into it, it'll leak. It's like a bag full of fluid, and you hit it and it's just like, it leaks out. And so it's easily told apart from American foul brood in that way. And there's a question of what do you do if you've had chalk brood, and the same thing will apply to what you do with you have sac brood. These are real minor diseases, and typically, if you have a colony that's going downhill because of them and not because of them, it's because of some other reason. But I am going to talk about some things that you can do with these minor diseases like chalk brood and sac brood in a minute. Let's just do, how are we doing for time here? Let's just, let's see, any questions on this? Let's go straight to, I'm going to go straight to what to do. I want to get 15 minutes. We have enough time for discussion. I'm so sorry. I'm so talkative. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Here's 7 techniques, chalk brood, sac brood, all of them. They generally, a lot of them work. So this thing I'm going to talk about are disease-specific solutions, and that's the antibiotics, which Peter was talking about earlier. And as Peter mentioned, you cannot buy these. You cannot go to the Man Lake or Dedant and buy these without a prescription from your vet. And your vet won't do this unless you form a vet-client relationship. So you have to have the vet come out, meet you, and getting it can be a little bit difficult. So you're going to need a prescription, and oftentimes they're going to want to see the disease. And as Peter probably has experienced, they don't even know anything about the disease, so they're reluctant to even talk to you. So it can be a bit of a chore. So what do we have that can cure a lot of these things simultaneously? Well, when it comes to viruses, and in general, and lots of problems, control your varroa. Number one, varroa, they're piercing your pupa, they're leaving these holes. And of course, one virus that is transmitted clearly is deformed wings virus. So stress colonies, stress bees lead to brood diseases. Control your varroa. The second thing is change your queen. There's a lot of evidence that there are the behaviors that control one brood disease control them all. And hygienic behavior, and a shameless plug for our Oregon queen breeder, hygienic behavior is this behavior where the bees detect a disease larva quickly and are able to take it out before the disease has a chance to spread. The best data set from this comes from very purebred hygienic behavior stock from the University of Minnesota. In this graph, we have chalk brood. You have the colonies start off. Here you see they start off with the same level of chalk brood infection. And you can see hygienic, there's a same kind of severity rating in 2 different years. You can see in this year here, there's chalk brood all throughout the susceptible non-hygienic colonies. It just kind of pops up at very low severity on 2 dates. And then it kind of is at very low levels in the other year. American foul brood, similarly, it's very effective. You can see here are hygienic and non-hygienic colonies through their first year. And then when you come into the second year, you can see that American foul brood virtually disappears and from the hygienic colonies, and it's still circulating in the non-hygienic colonies. So and one thing I have not seen is hygienic behavior in European foul brood. I don't know why. That's a study that's waiting to be done. I suspect it will work very well. Another solution when it comes to things like chalk brood and sac brood is wait a little. Many of these diseases, this is acute paralysis virus, but sac brood very similar. It pops up, it looks bad, and it goes away. So for things like sac brood and chalk brood in particular, just wait a couple weeks and oftentimes it'll be gone. But I want to spend most of my time talking about comb renewal because I think comb is the number one way in which brood diseases are transmitted, and renewing your comb can be very important. And I think this is the way that most of these infections start. You're making, here you see this is a beekeeper in northern Alberta making these 1-frame nukes in June. He's going to put a queen cell with 1 frame of brood and bees into that box. And if one of those frames has AFB, that colony is not going to make it. I know this because I've done this before. I have 1 frame put into these colonies, and I can just put in the beginning of May, the colonies that AFB, the number of ropey and scale go up and up and up. And then by the beginning of October, those colonies are dead. It will die that year if it has 1 frame of AFB in it. So, you need to do this comb replacement. But the question is, how do you know when your comb is too old? And, it reminds me of this comic here where, you don't ask any questions as long as it's woolly, the shepherd says. And you don't ask any questions about comb because comb is comb is comb. But no, it isn't. Comb has gotten too old when there are the names of dead people's emblazoned on the top bars. Those frames should go out. And also, if you're at the bee meeting and you brag about the age of your comb, that's also a great sign that your comb is too old. What you need to do is have good lighting. The key time to deal with old comb is when you're sorting dead outs. And I love this sorting line from Southern Alberta. You can see here the staff has a really good lighting. They've got masks, dust masks to protect them from all the kind of debris. And they're going through the combs carefully with good lighting. And what they're doing is, as soon as they find comb, in the old days, you would just toss the wax foundation out. But what they're doing is, as soon as they find comb that looks old and dark, and they've got a numbering system on them, so they know the years they were produced, they'll just take that old comb and scrape it off. Scrape it off, and this is best done in the winter when it's a bit cold, and you can easily, with a hive tool and the right kind of setup. You see, this is really comfortable. Nothing's floating around. They've got a nice place for all the comb to go in. They're just scraping it, and off it goes, and that comb goes back in. That's a real easy way to replace old comb. And that, some of that stuff has drone comb on it. It's just not worth it. And so scraping it down. You can see the setup here, just really nice. You can see some of this comb here. This is almost 50% drone comb. This is going to be turfed. And they've got a nice setup here for having it go into the eggs and just getting rid of it. The other thing you can do, I've always loved this. This is from 1954. I love, beekeeping in pumps and dress, to me, is, the high point of skill, and it's amazing. But I love this. This is really simple. It's from Britain. And so what this person has, they've got a colony here that they want to replace the comb. There's been something wrong with this colony, but they don't want to kill all the brood, like this active brood rearing season. So what they've done is they take the queen and one frame of brood from the old box, and they put it into a box of foundation. And then they've got this excluder is placed over the box containing the remaining brood, and the box of the queen is placed over it. So there it goes. And then they flip it around after this thing broods up, and they just take, I guess they're going, I don't advocate this, but they take this old box, they make honey, get off, away it goes. And then they've got this without disrupting any of the brood nest, they've been able to get rid of all their old comb and kind of keep the brood nest going. All this brood hatches out and ends up on the foundation. There's all sorts of studies out there, tons of studies that show that you can get rid of even diseases like nosema. And I'm going to go through the treatments here. You have old comb here and these different comb replacement strategies on the bottom. The honey yield, even with the comb replacement, outpaces the old comb because the colonies are healthy. And in fact, you have very low levels of nosema. I was always curious about this because everybody knows Moses Quimby, right? Moses Quimby was the person who invented the smoker. He ran this huge operation during the Civil War. He was a Quaker and a pacifist. So he had this, which allowed him to sort of capitalize on the high price of sugar during the Civil War. And he ran this huge operation. But I read this in The Mysteries of Beekeeping Explained. He said for American fowl brood, the only thing effectual was to drive out the bees into an empty hive. And when he did this, he was able to move a honey crop. And so this is an old technique of it's kind of a variation on what I described before. You have an old infected colony with American fowl brood. You shake all the bees into this box with foundation, and there's various ways that you can kind of like hold them there and shake them again. But they kind of transit all the spores that are in their honey stomach into their rectum, and the colonies look really good afterwards. The disease doesn't return. And I did this experiment when I was working in Northern Alberta. I was really interested because we had oxytetracycline resistance in commercial beekeeping operations in Northern Alberta. And I thought, well, you've got three options. You can either turf those colonies when you find them in packages, or you could shake them onto foundation during dandelion, like here, and see maybe you would make more money by shaking them because you have the packages. And as a control, we had the wintered colonies in the back. And so you can see this is like early spring in Alberta. It's shooken on the foundation. They make these very small, compact brood nests. They're very efficient with how they're using their brood, but they come along. And this is my favorite graph I've ever made in my life. This is the honey yields of those different groups. So the shaken colonies, ended up making just 200 pounds a colony. It was just a horrible year. The packaged colonies made 250 pounds of honey per colony, and the wintered colonies, almost 300 pounds. All right. Okay, I'm so proud of that. Anyways, it was great. And the only thing that happened was, if you look at on each of the dates pulled honey, all that happened was the shaken colonies were right on pace with the package and winter colonies. They just didn't make any honey on that first pull. They needed that to make the wax, so they caught up. And so if you shake a colony on the foundation early enough, and just think of this, folks, how many of your colonies just were in the trees? Just shake the early onto new comb. They're going to catch up. It'll take some of the pressure off of building colonies. And when colonies are young and growing, they can draw out a whole lot of wax. I'm going to skip, just quickly back to the 50s. Another thing that people have done to disinfect comb is use acetic acid. This has been recently revived for eczema control. I want to point out this is 80% acetic acid, and this is a bare hand. That's not a good idea. Neither is none of this protective equipment that this gentleman is wearing. But nonetheless, it has been shown fumigation with 80% acetic acid on a rag like this. Fumigating can be a way to disinfect combs for at least eczema spores, not American foul brood. For American foul brood, you're going to need to get a torch, a tiger torch, if you want to retain the boxes. And you want to melt off all of that wax. You want to take it all off because that's where spores will reside. I'm going to just quickly, I'm not going to get into the details of this. We're running low, 8:30. Oh, no, we're okay. It's going to racing. Okay, fix it 5, use irradiated pollen. If you're going to use, I have to say, pollen is the best stimulant for any pollen patty. Bees that have a pollen patty with just 5% pollen will consume that patty way quicker. If you can find pollen patties with pollen in them, go for it. Those patties will not go to waste. They will get all eaten. The problem is, if it's not irradiated, it's a real problem. I remember, so here we have a pollen patty, and you can see here, although this is for pollen for consumption, for human consumption, they'll go through and sort things. Pollen from colonies that have had American foul brood will have the disease. And this was shown way back in the, forgot about this. So there's a study from the 90s. They said if you took pollen from AFB colonies, 100% of the samples of pollen would be contaminated. And they all noticed that 43% of the pollen from seemingly healthy colonies, they couldn't find disease symptoms in them, were also contaminated with American foul brood. And the problem with this comes out in this study from the 60s. So what they did is they had a colony. I promise we're almost at the end, folks. This is a great study. Just stick with me here. We're almost there. Okay, the very top. They fed the colonies healthy pollen, and they came back 16 weeks later, and they counted the cells of the EFB, and there was no AFB. It's clean. And of those the three colonies, none of them had AFB. If they fed pollen that was trapped from an AFB colony, then they had, some AFB popped up and all the colonies had AFB. If they did the same thing, pollen from an AFB colony, but they took scale. And I think I told you about this before. You take scale and you put it in a syrup and you feed it to the bees and just put lots of scale. Look at that. You don't get any bump in the AFB. Here it's the same as this. It implies that the AFB being trapped in the pollen, not the syrup. It's the pollen that's causing the infection. And this is validated here. This is 17 scales per colony. But when they made a patty, this is the worst patty. Don't do this. If you get one thing, don't do this at home. They took pollen that was trapped from a colony with AFB, and then they actually took scale and they ground it into the patty. This is like the super worst patty. And look at how many scale how much disease was in the colony. It just goes to show that pollen is a really good way to get spores into young larvae. So be very careful when you're buying pollen, but do consider buying pollen. And there are plenty of places that irradiate the pollen. And I've done numerous studies on this. No AFB gets through that. The last fix is just have big, strong colonies. If you are going into winter, folks, with 3 frames of bees, it isn't going to work out. And if you have a colony that's limping along, it's going to be susceptible. So really try to keep your colony strong. You know, you have to split them. You have to take these chances with your brood nests and disrupt them once in a while, but really try to get them into good solid strength, because those bees can really muscle through a lot. Okay, so just don't panic. Brood diseases are not the end of the world. You will survive them. And 7 things. You know, if you can use antibiotics and use them in the right way, they can help buy you time. In a lot of cases, sac brood and chalk brood, you can just wait. The disease will clear up on its own. Control varroa mites, keep varroa mites at bay. They will just mess everything up. You can requeen. That break often, I didn't mention this, but the break will often allow for the disease to sort of clear, but try to, look for good hygienic stock. That will clear up a lot of your brood diseases. Renew your comb. If you're going to have pollen, use cleaner irradiated pollen, and really be a little bit ruthless with your weak and struggling colonies. Try to keep your colonies nice and strong. A strong, healthy, well-fed colony can motor through a lot of problems. Okay, that's it. Ta-da! Sorry it took so long. That was a bit of a stretch.
No, that was good.
So a well-fed hive, would you say that feeding sugar is important when there's, like the late spring that we had? Should we have been, I don't like to feed sugar in my bees, but never in the spring. But this spring was so crazy that I think so should we have been feeding? Is that what, were they stressed?
This spring, spring was just madness. I don't know what, I have no advice for this spring. Because, at the same time, I had colonies that I thought were struggling, and then they were swarming in the rain, and I don't know. But I do think there is I think this season was tricky for syrup feeding in the spring, because I think colonies grew surprisingly fast. They shouldn't have. I don't know if it was the same. That was how it was in Oregon. We had rain. I didn't think the colonies should pick up, but somehow they got enough pollen jammed in there and I went in to feed them and I was like, oh my God. But I do think, yes, sometimes early in the spring, it works 2 ways, Kit. Maybe other people have advice on this, but the other way is, I think what is really hard on a colony is if you start feeding it and trying to get it going too early and not following through. So you give them pollen patties, you give them syrup, and then you stop and there's a dearth. And I think that can cause a lot of stress. You have to keep it going till the pollen flow. You can't start excitedly in February and then stop. Bruce, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, I have a question about it was the Canadian photograph that you showed us scraping the comb. The idea was to get new honeycomb, and it looked to me like what they were doing was scraping plastic foundation, and then do they reuse that foundation and put it back in the hive, and the bees build it out into worker comb?
Yeah, I've done this as well, and it works pretty good, actually. I was a bit skeptical. I thought it would be like new foundation and have, a quarter of them would be drawn out improperly, but it worked out okay.
And I'm assuming that based on what you said earlier, that you would not want to do that if you suspected that they were diseased combs, but that you're just clearing them out in general. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Bruce. And I guess it's it's like, it kind of like maybe sets up two levels. The one is like, if you're calling, you're going through, if you're going through dead outs and you find AFB, I would take all that comb and just put it into the pile, everything. What I didn't say is like, how much comb should you replace? So the idea, I think a modest level of replacement is something like in every brood chamber that you make up every year, you have 2 new combs. I think a better way to go is like 4 new combs in every brood chamber. And dead outs are the best way to do this. Like in live colonies, it's often hard to get, when are you going to take the comb out? I think that manipulation with the woman with the skirt, an example of how to do this on an active brood nest. But a dead out affords you the capacity to really clean things up and start new. And so 4, 5 new combs or 5 scraped down combs and letting them start again can reduce just overall inoculum. And I think in all those studies, like the Nazima study I showed you, there's another one with chalk brood. It's just like things that are just always pervasive. It just knocks the disease level down, it seems.
Okay, but so the amount of wax that's left on the foundation and winds up being essentially insignificant, I would gather.
That's what I don't know the study that's ever done that. Like, I don't know how much is left behind. I think it's like the same as on some foundation. What I'd love to do if I had a lot of money is I really love. I had a friend who would buy foundation. When I buy Pierco, I buy the triple waxed. I buy the expensive stuff because they draw it out better. If I had all the money in the world, I would scrape them down and I'd pay an undergraduate to go with a paintbrush and just paintbrush on some nice clean wax just to kind of get, I think they would start better. I miss the days of having wax foundation. Bees drew comb on wax foundation. I miss those days. But the question is there enough inoculum left behind or you get the max benefit? I think the answer is nobody knows. And so I should highlight the uncertainty there. When the people do these comb replacement studies, they mean starting brand new.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for those, Bruce. Those were great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a question from LB that says some of my frame. Oh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Did you want to ask a question out loud or?
Yeah, I was noticing, well, I had chalk brood this year, which was unfortunate. But I also noticed that a lot of my the bottom deep would kind of be emptied out. Like there's tons of bees on the top and not very many bees on the bottom. And then even some of those bottom frames would have propolis like coming up into the comb. And I was just curious about that propolis, if that indicates that the comb is old. I feel like some of my comb is getting old and maybe that was causing some problems.
My sense is the propolis is disconnected and others can pipe in here. I often see sometimes if I've got I don't know, bees have different predilections for propolis. Sometimes I will find this big hunk and I almost have won the lottery because it comes like in a golf ball size right underneath the bottom of the comb near the entrance. I don't know if it has to do with a draft or something stimulating them to put it there. I don't know if that's an indication of age. A better way to do this, if you have, you're not freaking out and you're buying combs like I often am at the last minute, don't have enough room, is as you assemble your colonies, take one of those paint pens that you use to mark the queens, the bee supply places, and just write, 22 on it. And then write 23 on it. And I think a good rule of thumb is to retire comb that's at least 5 years old. Like if you can rotate all your comb every 5 years, I think that's a good practice. And having dates on there can be useful in kind of figuring how to retire comb. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you. So maybe it was drafty down there and they were putting the propolis because of that, because there wasn't that many bees down there.
Yeah, what do some of the veterans think? Oh, there we go. We have a hand go up.
Oh, no, sorry. I was going to ask another question. I would not call myself a veteran at this point. Kathy may have
Okay.
some thoughts though.
Would others agree that I see Kathy has a clapping. I think Kathy is agreeing. Is that right? No, you're not agreeing. Oh, Kathy now has her hand up. Okay. Just a quick question here. Kathy asked, is the pollen bought from commercial companies irradiated? Not necessarily. I know Global Patty does buy, and I think they should be, and most probably are. And so, but you can ask them that. Say, I won't buy it unless it's irradiated, and they'll let you know. I know there's a facility in Vancouver, just across the border there, that does a lot of pollen for the continent. Oh, Kathy, I think you're muted or something. Are you muted? No, you're not. Okay, I might have to get you to type it. Your question, I can't hear you. Okay, so Regina says, once you scrape the foundation off, do you do anything else? Spray it down with a high velocity hose, freeze it. There's a great YouTube video, and I gotta find it again. Somebody has like this jig, because can you imagine trying to hold the comb with like a pressure washer? I mean, it's just going to be impossible. But this guy had this jig set up that you could put the comb in, and then you can you could do one comb at a time. It was really brilliant. But yeah, I think that would be great. I think you'd get a lot more off with a high pressure hose. Okay, PSBA board member, you're next.
Sorry, I should have renamed myself. I have a question. I live in a very cold place, and so when I get chalk brewed, it's very serious actually. I even have a colony this year that dwindled rather than augment in population. And I've done a lot of reading on the kinds of things that can try to help control chalk brood. It looks like my queen was just not laying fast enough in this particular colony to get over it. I have a question about how worried I should be about the comb, because my comb is not old, but I am kind of wondering if I should just treat all of the comb from that colony as toxic and make sure that I don't put it anywhere else and I make everybody redraw comb.
When it comes to chalk brood, I'm less convinced of it certainly will help. Replacing the comb in that colony will lessen the amount. And I will, in Alberta, also place, we would often get queens from New Zealand, and they would invariably always get chalk brood. It was every time. We would run studies where we were trying different treatments, and we knew we could elicit chalk brood with the queen source. So another option is maybe just looking at another queen source. But if you're really, unless the inoculum is really high in conditions, or my sense is that it should be one of those things that doesn't necessitate that level of scrutiny. But to always be safe and just, if you got some old, just get rid of it and give it some new comb. Okay. All right. Where are we here? Kit, how are we doing for time? How long do you want to take this? And I'll.
Well, I just erased my clock. Oh, is it 9 o'clock? Well, as long as people are willing to stay, you'll see people fade away, and they aren't. We still have our crowd. I mean, what do other people feel? When do we need to draw the line?
How about we go another 10 minutes? Would that be
okay?
Pushing it?
Can I have a question, or were you going in a direction because you have 10 minutes?
You're the moderator, so moderator's prerogative.
I was going to type it, but now I get to ask. I was told that EFB, which is really the struggle I'm having this season, and many of my friends are too. When you see all that yellow larva, and you just know that you have EFB, and then you've got spotted frames of brood, that it was caused because of the nurse bees being in the larva too much, and that they were infected and it was concentrated in too few larvae, which you didn't really talk about that in terms of the seasonality. You didn't, and that made sense to me, because then it spread very rapidly because you have the nurse bees over visiting the same larva, and all of it gets sick. And then you have EFB through the hive. And then when the honey flow started and everybody got busy and the queen was really laying, then it dissipated. That isn't kind of the story that you had at all. And I'm kind of very confused.
I guess the thing that I was trying to emphasize is how contradictory the kind of tales about EFB ideology are. And I think, what you just described, I think could be tested. And I think there needs to be a little bit more work, kind of like looking at what's in a larva when, and what's in an adult when, and what's in the brood food when. Like, I think if you had samples at each one of those points, you could answer those questions. And I think that kind of work has just not been done. It's shocking that it hasn't been done. And I expect in the next couple of years, with EFB kind of spiking up, that hopefully the picture, what was kind of state of the art in 1992 can be advanced. I think those questions require kind of like some measurements at various points in that chain that haven't been done. It makes sense to me, but gut pH makes sense to me, but I just, it would be nice to kind of like track this story more carefully, because I think it hasn't been.
So the bottom line is just that it's sort of just an unknown, and we just have to battle it as best we can. New comb, new queen, do those smart things.
I think I'm going to send to the list to your group. I think comb replacement is probably one of the most important things with EFB. I've seen incredible results with it, and I haven't really seen good sustained results from antibiotics. And I'm a little bit worried that there's the lines that are around here are resistant to Oxytet anyways. The work just came out this spring, and so I think it is your best resort at this point. And that's all I'm going to say right now. I have all sorts of notions, but they're not proven.
But you did feel that or you do believe that the brood comb is the focus of the replacement, and that the honeycomb is less affected by EFB, or
with all the diseases. Yeah.
All.
I think with with all of them, they're less a problem. And I think with EFB, I suspect, my sense is the adults are the big reservoir, but I don't know this for a fact. I think adults are carrying a lot through them. But
your discussion about the feces passing it away is fascinating too, because I think because they don't defecate in the hive unless they're in their cell.
Yeah.
Okay, there's just a lot that to kind of pull it together with a bow is helpful, even though it's not a very pretty bow.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll just say, and sorry for those of you, the findings of EFB and the speculation around it is boring, because in some ways it doesn't give you a clear path to what to do. Think about it this way, Kit. And I don't know if this is a good way to think about it. It does not really invade the body cavity. European foul brood really leaves the picture after the larva dies. And when you try to culture old, fully infected kind of larva, you can't even get the causative agent out of it. It's a Paenibacillus alvei, which is really aggressive. And so I think it must be coming through the poop. Like as soon as it's in the larva, maybe they're picking a little bit of up when they're tossing it out. I almost think like it's mostly gone by then. I think it really does need to go through something like that's my suspicion. It has to go through the gut and out again to transmit. but again, like there's just so little data on like where this thing is moving, where the reservoirs are, that I'm a little nervous about being, as as straightforward as with American Foul Brood.
Yeah, that's so different than what I've read, which is that the nurses are, it's not the poop, it's just that they're in there cleaning and then they go to the next cell and they're in there cleaning. So that's just a whole new, you blew it open. It's awesome. Thank you. I mean, it's sadly awesome.
Well, we'll see. Hopefully, you'll have your own apiculture extension person kind of fill you in on this story next episode. But
Cool.
Okay, so a couple questions here. This is totally anecdotal, but I've been shaking bees onto new comb and requeening my infected hives. Okay, no, we've done that already. Okay, where are we here? Apparently wax moths are really good at cleaning the last bits of whole foundation after I scrape the comb. Don't ask how I know. Okay, thanks, Ben. Okay, I found irradiated pollen at Better Bee. Excellent. Tracy says at Regina, I use a paint roller and paint more wax on it. I really think if painting a little bit more wax on the foundation, it really does kind of make full wax foundation way better. And it's, with a paint roller, you can go through a lot, and a little electric frying pan just to heat up your wax. Marking frames with dates is not that great. Bees use some combs more than others. Marking frames with dates is not, well, it's that I think Kathy raises a good point. Like, what if I can have frames in my honey supers, and they're going to be good for a long time. And some frames to get, they're less than 5 years old and they just kind of got built out wonky and they should be retired right away. So I agree, looking at comb, especially at the dead out phase, is a great way, and retiring early is not a bad thing. Kathy, is there a better way to track? Okay, you guys are having when the comb gets old and pretty dark. Okay, thank you guys. Great. There's a great discussion here for any of you who are looking for how to retire comb. Your hygienic bee slide is great. Thoughts on why hygienic bees aren't causing super spreader events by trying to dig out disease broods? Oh, Jeff, I have a friend who's been following Jay Evans' research at the USDA, and Jay has been noticing viral transmission with Varroa-sensitive hygiene bees. I haven't followed research carefully. I did share a room with him and we did talk about it, but we had a few beers in us by that point, so I was the details are fuzzy. But if I remember right, I asked him this question, whether are you saying that, Varroa-sensitive hygiene, which is somewhat related to hygienic behavior, and that the bees are prematurely aborting cells, they're very sensitive to Varroa mites. Are you saying, Jay, that the benefits of Varroa-sensitive hygiene are negated by the fact that when they take the larva out, pupa out, they're picking up viruses? He said, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying his reasoning is if you had Varroa-sensitive hygiene colonies, heloqueens, for example, the virus levels would never get high. And so you would never have such a super spreading event because they're really taking it down. And when it comes to brood diseases, it's just clear. Marla, and then before her, Martha Gilliam, had done so much work, and then Walter Rothenbuehler at Ohio. You get no super spreader events. The diseases just go down. Hygienic behavior works for brood diseases very well. Getting it at pure enough levels and pure enough stock is the trick. Because when you pick up a magazine, everybody says they have hygienic behavior bees, and there's no control over that term. Does boiling wax spores of any of the diseases so that you can reuse your melted wax? Great question. I will say one thing. Some of the nicest work on American foul brood and sort of reinfection comes from Denmark. And they did a really nice study where they took foundation and they kind of made their own foundation, and they put in spores of AFB into the foundation, and they really brought it to extremely high levels. And what they noticed is that they could not elicit an infection, but they did notice spores circulating around the colony. So the answer is, when you render wax, some of the spores are still active, but it doesn't seem to be nearly as bad as transmitting a comb with scales and larvae in them. And also so yes, it's possible. The other thing I did want to mention is there is, when I was in Northern Alberta, people had these, and they freaked me out. There were these big paraffin wax, like they wouldn't paint their boxes. They take their supers, they dip them in hot paraffin, and they'd have a tiger torch in this big vat of like paraffin. I was so petrified the whole thing was going to go up in flames. But there is work from New Zealand showing that like 20 minutes in hot paraffin will, take care of American foul brood spores at a high temperature. But it's pretty resilient stuff. I think we've exhausted all the questions, and I think 10 minutes is down. I took you right to 9 o'clock. Thank you so much for staying on. And remember, two things. Remember what I told you about where larvae die and the patterns. That'll help you with your diagnosis, and run for the board. Please go home and consider running for the board of your association and getting the executive. Even if you're a newbie, this is the best way to get to know everybody in the club, and it's a great social thing. Join the executive, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. You've been wonderful.
Yeah, and you're
Okay.
a fantastic educator, especially for teaching for such a wide range. Thank you.
Yeah, I was very engaged.
That's great. Is he still here? Okay, so should we sign off? Are we complete and we want to say goodnight? Or do we want to chat about bees?